It had been a long day. I was drained physically and mentally by the time I finally made it home. I barely had the energy to change out of my clothes before collapsing onto my bed. The familiar softness of my mattress was comforting the blanket, wrapping me in warmth as I drifted off my mind, slowly surrendering to sleep. The house was quiet. My stepbrother Kovac had been out all day, so I figured he was still hanging out with his friends. It was one of those rare nights where I felt like I could truly relax alone with my thoughts, without the usual noise of his video games or his late-night movies playing in the background. As my body sank deeper into the comfort of sleep, I vaguely registered a sound, soft footsteps, the door creaking open, but I was too far gone, too lost in the haze of exhaustion, to react or even open my eyes. It wasn't unusual for Kovac to pop in. Now and then, he would sometimes come into my room to ask random questions or just hang out. It was part of the routine we developed over the years, since our parents had gotten together. But tonight something felt different. I was somewhere between sleep and wakefulness, caught in that strange liminal space where reality and dreams blur together. I felt the mattress shift slightly beneath me, the familiar creak of the springs as someone sat down on the edge of my bed. At first, I didn't think much of it. It had to be Kovac, probably bored or needing something. I stayed still, not wanting to fully wake up just yet. I assumed he would leave soon, but he didn't. Instead, I felt the warmth of his presence closer now, the weight of his body sinking further into the mattress. The soft sound of his breathing was near, too near, and the closeness of it sent a strange shiver down my spine. I kept my eyes shut, my breathing, even pretending to be asleep. Maybe if I stayed like this long enough, he would get bored and leave. But then I felt it, his hand, gentle, grazing my shoulder. It was a light touch, one that could have been accidental. But there was something intentional about it, something deliberate. The warmth of his fingertips lingered, slowly trailing down my arm, in a way that felt too personal, too intimate. My heart started to race, pounding in my chest, as my mind scrambled to make sense of what was happening. Kovac had never done anything like this before. Sure, we had always been close, but this was different. My thoughts ran wild, confusion mixing with something else, something I didn't want to acknowledge just yet. As his hand slid lower, brushing against my side, I could feel my breath catch in my throat. Every nerve in my body was on high alert. But still, I stayed frozen, unsure of what to do. The warmth of his touch seeped through my shirt, and I fought against the urge to react. What was he doing? Did he know I was awake? Was this some kind of prank? Before I could even form an answer in my head, I felt him shift behind me. His body now closer than before. The heat from his skin was unmistakable, radiating in the small space between us. I could feel his breath against the back of my neck, soft but steady, like he was trying not to wake me, but it was too late for that. I was awake now, wide awake, and completely unsure of what to do. I stayed there lying, still trying to figure out what was happening. My mind raced with possibilities, but no matter how I tried to spin it, there was no denying that this was something more than just a brotherly gesture. His movements were too calculated, too slow, too intimate. It was then that I felt his lips barely grazing the back of my neck in a feather kiss that sent a jolt of electricity through my entire body. My heart was pounding, now the heat rising in my cheeks as I tried to process what was happening. This wasn't a mistake. He knew what he was doing. I should have said something. I should have stopped him, but I couldn't. I was caught, trapped in the strange mix of fear and curiosity, my body betraying me as I leaned into the warmth of his touch, as his hand slid down to my waist, Pulling me ever so slightly closer, I felt a tension building between us. Something that had been there all along, but that we had both been ignoring, the unspoken tension, the lingering looks, the moments where we'd brushed up against each other for just a little too long. It had always been there, simmering beneath the surface, and now, in the quiet of the night, with nothing but the sound of our breathing filling the room, there was no escaping it. I still hadn't opened my eyes, still pretending to be asleep, but every touch from him sent a fresh wave of heat through me. It was like he was daring me to acknowledge what was happening, daring me to break the silence between us. His fingers brushed along my side again, his breath hot against the back of my neck. It was intoxicating, overwhelming, and I could feel my resolve slipping away. I wanted more, even though I knew I shouldn't even. Though I knew this was dangerous territory. Suddenly, Kovac's hand slid around my waist, pulling me. Flush against him, my breath hitched in my throat, my body stiffening at the sudden closeness. His chest pressed against my back, the steady beat of his heart matching the erratic pace of my own. I could feel every inch of him, the warmth of his skin against mine, and it was all too much. I knew I couldn't keep pretending anymore. Slowly, almost hesitantly, I turned to face him, my heart racing as I opened my eyes, for the first time since he had entered the room. And there he was, looking down at me with an intensity that took my breath away. His eyes were dark, filled with something I couldn't quite place, something deeper, more primal. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the air thick with the weight of everything we weren't saying. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. But before I could say anything, he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine, in a kiss that was soft, hesitant, like he was waiting for me to stop him, but I didn't. The kiss deepened, slow and deliberate, as if we had all the time in the world. His hand moved to my hair, gently pulling me closer, and I melted into him, all the tension between us finally snapping. It was like everything we had been holding back, all the unspoken emotions came pouring out in that moment, and I didn't want it to stop. I remained still, my heart pounding in my chest as Kovac's fingers traced along my arm, his touch both foreign and familiar. At the same time, every nerve in my body was on high alert, yet I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I was frozen in the moment, caught between the desire to stop him and the pull to let this unfold. His hand lingered, hesitating before it slid down to my side, his fingers grazing in the thin fabric of my shirt. The sensation was electric, setting off a chain reaction inside of me that I couldn't control. What was he doing? More importantly, why wasn't I stopping him? My mind raced, but my body stayed rooted in place, reacting in ways I didn't expect. I felt the bed shift again as Kovac leaned closer, his breath warm against the back of my neck. My skin prickled at the closeness. The inac why of it all. This wasn't just some sibling affection. Not anymore. His movements were too deliberate, too intimate for that. The tension that had been bubbling beneath the surface for so long was now bursting, and neither of us could ignore it any longer. And that's where it all started. Without a word, his lips brushed lightly against my neck, a feather kiss that left my body tense and alert. It was so subtle, so soft, that for a second I thought I had imagined it. But then I felt it again, this time more insistent. It wasn't a dream. He was kissing me, and I wasn't stopping him. I should have pulled away. I should have said something, anything, to stop this from going any further. But instead, I let it happen. I felt myself leaning into the warmth of his touch, my body betraying the thoughts swirling in my mind. My breathing quickened, my heart racing, as he continued to press his lips against my skin, each kiss sending a surge of heat through me. This was wrong. We both knew it. But the way he touched me, the way his body pressed closer to mine, it felt so right. Like something we had both been waiting for, without ever admitting it to ourselves. His hand slid around my waist, pulling me slightly closer to him. The heat between us was palpable now, and I could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing against the back of my neck. I hadn't opened my eyes yet, still pretending to be asleep, but it was becoming harder to keep up the shade. I felt Kovac's body shift beside mine, his arm wrapping around me, holding me close. The warmth of his chest pressed against my back, and I could feel the strong, steady beat of his heart against me. The closeness was intoxicating, overwhelming, and I found myself sinking into it. Despite the alarm, bells going off in my mind. I knew I couldn't keep pretending. I had to acknowledge what was happening between us. Slowly, cautiously, I opened my eyes, my heart pounding as I turned my head to look at him. Kovac's eyes met mine, and for a moment, neither of us moved. The air was thick with unspoken words. The tension between us so heavy that it felt like the room was closing in around us. I swallowed hard, trying to find the words, but nothing came out. The look in his eyes, dark, full of desire, took my breath away. There was something there that I hadn't seen before, something deeper than just brotherly affection. It was a raw, unfiltered need that mirrored the emotions stirring inside me. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, the silence between us deafening. I could see the question in his eyes, the uncertainty, the hesitation. He was waiting for me to make the next move, to either pull away or let him in, and I couldn't deny it anymore. Before I could think, before I could stop myself, I closed the small distance between us, my lips meeting his, in a kiss that felt like it had been building for years. It was hesitant at first, soft and tentative, like we were both testing the waters. But then it deepened, growing more urgent, more intense with every passing second. Between us, finally snapping, the kiss was everything I hadn't known, I needed. It was filled with all the emotions we had suppressed for so long, all the unspoken words, the hidden glances, the fleeting touches that we had both brushed off as nothing more than sibling closeness. But now, it was clear that it had always been more than that. We broke apart, breathless, our foreheads resting against each other. The weight of what had just happened hung in the air, but neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. There was no going back now, no pretending that this was just a mistake. We had crossed a line and everything had changed. I looked into Kovac's eyes, searching for some kind of reassurance, but all I saw was the same confusion and desire that I was feeling. This wasn't something that had just started tonight. It had been simmering beneath the surface for a long time. And now that it was out in the open, there was no way to put it back. "What are we doing?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Kovac smiled, that same mischievous grin that had always made me feel like I was safe, like I didn't have to worry about anything. When he was around, his hand came up to gently cut my face, his thumb brushing over my cheek in a way that made my heart race all over again. "Something we should have done a long time ago." He murmured. His words sent a jolt of excitement through me, but there was also fear of what this meant, fear of what would happen next. But in that moment, with his lips still hovering over mine, all I could focus on was the way he made me feel, alive, wanted, needed. We kissed again, more urgently, this time, the weight of everything else slipping away, His hands explored my body, tracing over every inch of me, and I found myself responding in kind, pulling him closer with every touch. It was like all the emotions we had been holding back were spilling out, and I didn't want it to stop. We spent what felt like hours, like that, tangled in each other, lost in the moment. There were no words, just the soft sound of our breathing and the rustle of the sheets beneath us. Nothing else mattered, except us here now. The room felt smaller, now more intimate, as if the very air between us had changed. The soft glow from the moon outside barely illuminated the space, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. Time seemed to stretch out, making everything feel slower, deeper, as though we had all the time in the world. Yet the intensity between us was anything but slow. Kovac's breath was ragged as he pulled back for a moment, his lips inches from mine. Our foreheads still touching, his eyes were filled with something unspoken, an emotion I had never seen in him before, but one I felt reflected deep within myself. I couldn't tear my gaze away from him, and in that silence, the weight of what we had just done pressed in on me. We had crossed a line, and yet somehow it didn't feel wrong. It felt inevitable. I felt alive. But the story didn't even end here. I could feel his hand gently lie moving down my chest, his touch igniting every nerve, as if it were the first time his fingers traced along the edges of my shirt, his thumb brushing over my skin, leaving a trail of warmth that only made me want more. Every touch was slow, deliberate, as if he were memorizing. The way I felt beneath his hands, it was overwhelming, the closeness of it all. The desire that had been building between us for so long was finally out, in the open, and it was impossible to ignore. I reached out my hand, finding its way to the back of his neck, pulling him in, once again. Unable to resist the pull, I felt towards him. Our lips met, and this time, the kiss was hungrier, more insistent, as if we were trying to make up for all the lost time. I could feel the warmth of his body pressing against mine, the heat of his skin through the thin fabric of our shirts, and it only fueled the fire between us. His hands moved with a confidence that took my breath away, exploring every inch of me with a tenderness I hadn't expected, but craved all the same. Each touch sent a jolt of electricity through me, pulling me deeper into him. The air between us was thick with tension, a mix of emotions that I couldn't even begin to unravel, but none of it mattered in that moment. All I knew was that I didn't want it to stop. Not now. Not ever. Kovac's hand found its way under my shirt, his fingers trailing over my bare skin, sending shivers through me. His touch was gentle, but firm, and I felt my body arch toward him, responding in ways I hadn't anticipated. Every nerve was alight, every inch of me wanting more, and I could feel the same desire mirrored in him. It was like everything else had faded away. There was no world outside this room, no past, no future, just us, music here. Now my mind was spinning with 1,000 thoughts, 1,000 questions about what this meant, where this was going. But none of it seemed to matter. All I could focus on was the way he made me feel alive, like I was seeing him for the first time, like I was seeing myself. For the first time, we broke apart again. Both of us breathing hard, our foreheads still pressed together. His hand cued my face, his thumb rushing over my cheek, and the tenderness in his touch made my heart race. There was something in his eyes, something deeper than desire, something that made my chest tighten in the best way possible. "I've wanted this for so long," he whispered, his voice barely audible, but the weight of his words hit me like a tidal wave. I stared at him, my heart pounding, trying to process what he had just said. Had he really felt this way all along? Had we both been living with these feelings, never saying a word, never daring to act on them until now? Me too, I admitted, my voice shaky but honest. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest, like the air between us had cleared, and for the first time everything made sense. He smiled, a small, soft smile that made my stomach flip, and in that moment, everything felt right. There were no questions, no doubts, just the two of us, finally acknowledging what had always been there. The future could wait. All that mattered was this moment. He leaned in again, his lips capturing mine, in a kiss that was softer this time, more deliberate. It wasn't rushed or urgent, like before. It was slow, gentle, like we had all the time in the world. And in that moment, I realized that maybe we did. Maybe this was just the beginning of something we had both been too afraid to face. We lay there for a while, wrapped up in each other, our bodies tangled together in a way that felt so natural, so easy. His head rested against my chest, our fingers intertwined, and the silence between us was comfortable. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I didn't need to say anything, and neither did he. We had said enough. I ran my fingers through his hair, the softness of it, soothing, grounding me in the reality of what had just happened. We hadn't talked about what came next, but that didn't matter. Not now for now. This was enough, being here together, finally letting go of the walls we had built between us. The world outside could wait, the questions, the complications, all of that could wait. I glanced down at him, my heart swelling with emotions I hadn't even realized I was capable of feeling. He looked up at me, his eyes soft, his expression calm and content. "I don't want this to end," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "It doesn't have to," I replied, and I meant it. This didn't have to end. Not tonight. Not ever. As we lay there in the quiet of the night, I realized that everything I had been afraid of, all the doubts and fears that had been swirling in my mind, didn't matter anymore. What mattered was him, United States. And the fact that we had finally found our way to each other. We drifted off to sleep like that, tangled together, our hearts beating in sin, and for the first time in a long time, everything felt right. The room was still dark when I stirred awake, the quietness of the early morning hanging in the air like a blanket. I could feel the steady rise and fall of Kovac's chest against mine, his warmth still wrapped around me, and for a moment, everything felt surreal. The events of the night before played over in my mind like a dream, one I wasn't quite ready to wake up from. But it hadn't been a dream. The lingering heat of his body, the soft press of his arm around me, it was real. And the weight of what had happened settled in my chest, like a gentle reminder that our world had shifted. I stayed still, not wanting to disturb the peaceful moment, but my mind was racing with thoughts of what came next. What did this mean for us? Could things ever go back to the way they were, or were we forever changed by what we had shared? Kovac shifted slightly in his sleep, pulling me closer, his face nuzzling into the crook of my neck. The feeling of his breath against my skin sent a warm shiver through me, and I found myself smiling at the simplicity of it all for so long. We had danced around this tension between us, never daring to step over that invisible line. Now the line was gone, and I didn't want it back. I felt his grip on me tighten slightly as he began to wake up, his body moving in response to mine. His fingers trailed lazily across my chest, as if confirming that I was still there, still real. His eyes fluttered open, sleepy and soft, and he glanced up at me with a look that sent warmth radiating through my entire body. "Hey!" he whispered, his voice thick with sleep, but there was a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Hey," I whispered back, feeling a sudden rush of affection that I hadn't anticipated. We stayed like that for a moment, neither of us rushing to break the comfortable silence. The weight of what had happened was there, but it wasn't heavy. It felt natural, like we had all always been headed in this direction, even if it had taken us years to get here. Kovac finally propped himself up on his elbow, his eyes searching mine as if looking for answers or maybe reassurance. There was a vulnerability in his gaze that I hadn't seen before, and it made my heart ache in the best way. Last night, he began, his voice trailing off as he looked down, uncertainty creeping into his expression. I reached up gently, cupping his face in my hand, tilting his chin so he was looking at me again. "It wasn't a mistake," I said softly, answering the question he hadn't yet asked. His eyes softened relief, washing over his features as he let out a small breath he'd been holding. "I didn't think it was," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I wasn't sure. We didn't really talk about it." I smiled, my thumb brushing lightly against his cheek. "We don't have to figure it all out right now," I said, echoing the thoughts that had been swirling in my own mind since I'd woken up. "We can just see where this goes." Kovac's lips curled into a small smile, his hand coming to rest over mine. "Yeah," he agreed, his voice soft, "but sure, we can do that." The simplicity of the moment felt like a promise, one that didn't need to be spoken aloud. We didn't need to rush into anything, didn't need to define what this was. Right now, all that mattered was that we were here together, and that was enough. We eventually untangled ourselves from the warmth of the bed, the reality of the morning pulling us back to the surface. The house was quiet, the world outside still waking up, and it felt like we were the only two people in existence. The weight of the day hadn't yet settled in, and for a little while longer, we were suspended in this new reality we had created. We moved quietly around the house, getting dressed, making breakfast, in a comfortable silence that spoke volumes. There was no awkwardness, no hesitation, just the ease of two people who had finally stopped pretending. Every glance, every touch felt more meaningful now, like we were both seeing each other in a new light. I caught Kovac's eye as we sat down at the kitchen table, a small smile passing between us. It was in that moment that I knew things were different now. But different wasn't bad. Different was good. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing against mine, in a gesture that felt both familiar and new. "You good?" he asked, his voice casual, but there was a deeper question. "There are? We good?" I nodded, squeezing his hand gently. "Yeah, I'm good," I replied, and I meant it. As the day wore on, we fell back into our usual rhythm, watching TV, playing video games, talking about nothing and everything. But now there was an underlying current between us that wasn't there before, a quiet understanding that we had crossed a threshold, and there was no going back. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the living room, and I found myself thinking about what came next. There would be questions, complications, our parents would come home, and life would resume its normal pace. But the thought didn't scare me anymore. We had taken the first step, and whatever came next, we would face it together. Kovac glanced over at me from the couch, his eyes soft, and I could see the same thoughts reflected in his expression. We didn't need to say anything. We had already said enough. The night stretched on the quiet, comfort between us growing, and as I sat there next to him, I realized something we had spent so long hiding, avoiding the truth of what we felt. But now that it was out, in the open, everything felt lighter, easier. And maybe just maybe this